All right, since this has worked, how about now we comment out this driver code in the class of the stored files class, right? And let's add a search function. I know that someone would say that search functions or search methods are dependent on the type of thing that you actually search for. So for example, if I'm searching for an ID, the search function isn't going to be the same when I say that the search function now search for the mail, or maybe the search function search for mail and ID, both of them, right? So one would say that the search function should actually does not exist in the database handler class or the stored file class, but instead someone would say that the search function should exist in the actual entity. Or I wouldn't say entity here in this case, since we're talking a little bit about entity, controller, and boundary or ACB. I would say that the search function would actually be in the controller of the entity class. Like we would say if you have manage account controller, right? As we were gonna see when we refactor this into ACB, the methods that actually takes inputs from user and goes to the memory, goes to the stored file object, which is stored inside account, right? Goes to the data files to check if, for example, if I'm logging in, so I'm taking inputs from the user, I'm checking the database for the current account, which is I'm checking the object of stored files that is inside the accounts class variable in the created account object, right? So here I'm checking, and for example, when we create account, we're gonna take inputs from the user and actually add or write to the actual database, to the actual data file, to the actual memory and the actual data file, which is accounts.json, right? So any method, take this as what we call a fixed rule. Any method that takes inputs and goes and checks the database, whether it checks the database or checks or adds something to the database, to the table in the database, this is an indication that this should be inside a controller class, or maybe it should be its own controller class if it's too big, if it's doing so many things, you know. So we can have the create account inside. If we will say, when we refactor to ECB, if we will say that if this is the entity, then we would say that we have manage account controller, right? So inside manage account controller class, we would find something like create account method, we would find login method, right? One would say, why don't I just take the method and create a controller out of it? That's totally fine. You can do that, right? You can say that create account controller. You can say that you have login controller. But anyways, for the time being, I'm just talking about search here, since search really fits this criteria. Search takes an input and goes to the database and it searches, right? So why not put search inside the account for the time being, right? Why not just put it like this there, right? If you wanted to do it that way, that's fine, but the way that I'm going to put the search function, I'm going to add it into my actual database handling class, which is the stored file class. So I'm just going to have it right there, right? So the database or the search, I'm not really sure how would we implement the search for the time being, but let's just add it and see what can it take, what kind of arguments does it search for. Does it search for a username? Does it search for a mail? Right? So let's say that this system actually has two unique things. Anyone that has any account, his username and his email should be unique. So whenever we create an account, we want to make sure whenever we search for that person inside the database, first of all, there is no username, there is no mail with that specific account that is being created. And hence we can create that account, right? So let's talk about a little bit about the account class, right? So let's say that the account class is going to have a class variable that is called accounts, which is going to store a DB handler that contains the data.json. That was the whole point of what we were doing for in stored files, right? And that driver code was actually, all of this driver code was testing for this whole main event. And now let's define the actual constructor here and say, let's define the actual constructor here and say that it has a self of username, which is the same things that I have inside my data.json, username, password, email, right? So let's say that it has a username, it's by default initialized to none. It has a password, It's just initialized to none, and it has an email which is initialized to none as well, right? And now let's say that we have the methods that we have agreed upon here, set account, login, account, logout, and stuff like that, right? I'm just gonna add a couple of more methods. It's just one method. I'm going to call this account valid, which checks if the account is valid or not using username, I think it's gonna, since we are our two main parameters that we want to be unique for every created account are the email and the username. Since that, we are going to give account valid username and email. So these are the two parameters that account valid is going to search for whenever a create account will be created, or a create account method will be triggered. So you can tell now that create account is going to be invoking internally. It's going to be calling inside of it the account valid method, right? All right, so let's resume. Let's say that these are the methods that we have, right? And just one note here, create account would be searching inside what? If you think about it for a minute. Create account, or let me rephrase. When create account actually creates an account, right? What should be updated in your thinking? Well, yeah, what should be updated is the actual memory, the variable that holds the content. That's one. Two, what should be updated is the actual data file, right? So now one would say, where is the memory? Well, now the memory is inside the object that we have created of the DB handler, and we stored it inside the class variable accounts, right? So there is a memory inside this object, right? There is a memory inside this object. Okay, so this memory, that the variable itself needs to be updated at runtime. That's one. Two, that update should be reflected in the actual table, in the actual data.json, right? So bottom line here is that since the object that contains the memory, which is the temporary content of the data.json, will be updated, and note that that variable, that class variable that holds the object that has the memory, is a class variable. Since this is a class variable, the method that should be interacting with the class variable, as we've seen before, should be also a class method, right? So it should be also a class method, right? So let us see how this can be defined. All right, so now we have the class method, which is, we're just gonna leave this at the end. So let's say that this is a class method, and let's give it what we call create account. And a quick note for you, whenever you see yourself having class methods, most probably these class methods are for creating something, for adding something to the database, right? So most of the time these will work as its own controller. But anyways, let's just continue. So create account is a class method, right? What does it take? Well, it should take everything like that, right? And let's just write pass for the time being, okay? What do we do now, right? So let's say that we will say that we have account valid self. I'm not really sure what this would do, but let's just say pass for the time being. And let's say we have login, which is going to take username and password, right? But pass for the time being. And we have logout, and this is the only thing that we can fill in for the time being because that's really straightforward. Well, now logout will take every current variable, instance variable, and set it to back to none, right? And what else we have here? Password. And similarly, we have set account, which is going to actually set the current variables into their arguments that has been passed as inputs from the terminal, from the user, right, from the UI class or the main.by, right? So we have set account. I think this is what the user is going to send. The email, we are going to search for it ourselves, right? All right. Okay. All right. Let's do this. Let's say something different. Let's say that whenever we search for the username and we find that guy, how about in the same exact moment I get the index of that guy with that actual username, and once I know the index I can get the mail. So let's say that the mail will be fetched inside the login. Since we get the mail inside the login, notice that inside the login itself the set account will be called to log in the guy, right? To log in the actual user and to set the actual values for username and email and password, right? So set account is going to be invoked inside that function, the login function. Self dot set account. Notice that whenever an instance method calls another instance method, it uses the self, right? So it's going to take the username and password that we have had in the input in the login function as, or the login method as parameters, as inputs. It's going to take them, take the password, and the found index, which we use to find the email of that guy which exists in the database, we're going to send it as well into the set account. So let's say that set account takes as well the email. All right. Right, so let's say that it's gonna take both of them, and there's no need actually to define this later. We can just do this right now. Something that I really forgot. We should have a variable that says if the user is currently logged in or not, right? So this variable, it's going to be a boolean. This variable, whenever we log in the user and whenever inside the login, we're gonna use the search function which we supposedly added in the stored files. Like, yes, we have added a search function in the stored files. Okay, so using the search function in the stored files, where we are going to search the actual memory in the actual content of data.json, which is inside the accounts object, right? So using the search method, let me just rephrase this. I'm going to take the username, I'm going to search via that username, and if I found someone, I'm going to return the index of that guy, and since I have the index I can get the mail, and if I have the mail, now this is the time to set the account, right? Meaning that this is the time to override these values with the actual values of that user from database. Like if that user has these values in database, then now I'm going to tell him that you are logged in and all of these values are internally and automatically updated, right? So the same time we set the account, we want to make sure that the guy or the user is logged in. So this needs to be converted into true, right? So set account is going to take the same set of parameters that login takes if the user is actually found to be existent in the database. And once we take that parameters from the login, we can just say self username like that, and the same thing would go for the rest of them. This is the password, this is the what do we have, the email, right? And finally we will set the logged in into true, right? The same thing goes there. Whenever we log out, we want to put it back into false, right? And we would eventually want to check if the user is logged in or not, you know, because remember, whenever you go to a website, if you're not logged in, now notice that I'm logged in Lucidchart. If I'm not logged in, the interface is going to be a little bit different. I'm going to have a button that says login, right? Or a button that says sign up, for example. But if I'm logged in, I'm not going to see the button that says create account or sign up, right? I would only say log out, for example. So the view can get to be different depending on the current status of the user, if he's logged in or not. So a bottom line is that we will eventually want to get to interact with the instance variable logged in to see if the user is logged in or not in the created object of the account class, right? So instead of accessing an instance variable directly, we would have a method that does that functionality for me. So we would have a simple method that actually returns the status of the logged in user, right? So this is gonna be let's say we check logged in, right? And this is just gonna return logged in, self.logged in. So this is gonna return true or false. So if this returns true, that means that the guy is logged in. If it's not, then he's not logged in, right? So let's add check logged in let's add, what did we add more to the class diagram? Let's add check logged in there, logged in, right? And what do we have here? Let's say that let's implement the search function inside the stored files, right? So let's say that I have the stored file. First of all, how about we try to create an account, create an object? It would eventually work, but it would be meaningless unless we do some of the main event functions, some of the main methods. You know, the main methods in the account are basically, let's say, it's the account valid, it's the login, it's the create account. These are the most important ones, right? So I'm just going to put that account valid beneath here, and you're gonna know why just in a minute when we get to that part, before the actual create account. Okay, so let's see the search functionality, right? So when we are searching, you're most probably are going to search on one of two things in that system that we have described, right? We said that every username is going to be unique for every user, and every email is going to be unique for every mail. So whenever we are creating an account, we would want to search first of all for the given username, if it's there or not. If it's there, maybe I'm going to return the index of that customer, of that user. If it is not there, let's return something like -1, indicating that there is nothing with that specific, with that specific user, right? You could have used true or false, by the way, but I'm just gonna stick for the convention of indices. If you have an index, then the return thing is going to be a number. If you don't have an index, then the return value is going to be, well, let's say -1. Let's say that is going to be also a number, but that number is just one of my one of the programmers, one of the numbers or positions that will most likely will not appear as an index, which is -1. I know that this is not the case in Python. I know in Python you have -1 as an index, but in most languages you can use that value as an indication that there is no index returned, there's no index found. All right. So anyways, let's just go back to the search method, right? Notice that I'm going to be going back and forth between the Jupyter Notebook, the definition of the stored files, and the actual definition in the stored files.py, right? So let me just copy all of this and put in the Jupyter Notebook just to normalize everything. Yeah, I figured. Yeah, I figured. All right. Let us say that I'm going to stick with the current definition of stored files in Jupyter Notebook, because Jupyter actually complains about this file dunder properties. So, anyways, it's the same thing. I didn't do anything different here. I'm just going to add the search method, and the search method is pretty simple. Like, it takes, I'm going to say that whenever I want to check the mail, or whenever I want to check the username, I'm going to send the key. If I find something in that key, if I find a value for that key, like if that key actually existed, if that value existed, then I'm going to return the actual value. If it didn't exist, then there is nothing with that name. And the same thing goes with email, right? Right? So this, remember, all of this is a list, and again, the searching method algorithm will be dependent on the type of structure that you choose to structure your data in, right? So in my case, I'm going to have like multiple records as dictionaries, like that, right? So every dictionary represents a record, represents a user for me, right? So this is index of 0, and this is index of 1, and this is index of 2, and so on, right? So let's say that I'm going to say the following. A user is going to search, for example, the programmer who is using the object of the stored file is going to search for the username, or he can search for something like the mail, right? Whatever the user is searching for, I'm just gonna consider this just a key, and he wants to make some comparison, and he's gonna send the value as well, right? So search, for example, is gonna do something like that whenever he calls the search method. It's gonna do something like, please take that key and search for the current value in that key variable, or in that variable that is called un, which is going to be taken as an input from the user, right? So I'm going to, or the programmer, the developer is going to send the key that he wants to search in, and is going to search to send the value that he wants to, he seeks to find in that actual key, right? So this is the call part. So let's say that I'm going to set the index with a default value of -1, and I'm going to start a loop for every element inside the list, which is the content of that, the JSON, which exists, if we're talking about the DB handler, it exists in the memory. Remember, that's the most important part. It exists in the memory. So self.memory contains the actual list, the actual content of data, the JSON, and I'm structuring things that the actual container is a list, and inside of it, it has dictionaries. So now element here, every element of that list represents a dictionary or a record or a tuple, right? So let's say if that dictionary, whenever I give that key, if I found that value that the user has passed inside to the search method, right? If I found that value, then I can simply say that that guy exists in the database. So I can return, or I can send the index to be something like, so I can get the index of that user, right? Right, so I can get the index of that user. So we can say something like that. The index now is going to be equal self.memory dot index of. Remember that memory is a list, right? So lists can have this method, which is index. Is it index of or index? I think index of is in Java. It's index. It's index. Yeah. So index, you give the index the actual value, right? You give the index the actual value, and it returns to you the current index. So I'm going to give that list the actual dictionary, right? And I wanted to tell me what is that index of that dictionary, and hence I can return now the index, right? One would say, why are you accessing the memory? Like, what is the point of having it all? Why didn't you use element in get all, right? Like that, right? I would say that when I am inside the same class, that's my actual response to this question. If you are inside the same class, and if that is an instance method that wants to use an instance variable, then there is no big deal here. I don't find it really handy to write get all. Well, that's an instance method, and it's trying to use an instance variable in the same class. So what's the big deal? It's the same object. What's the big deal, right? Get all can be used, or in my opinion, its main usage will be between actual objects. Like if another object that has an object of stored file, let's say the account object, if the account methods wants to use an instance variable in the DB handler object or in the stored files object, now we should actually start thinking about using it all, right? So that's my interface for the to access, or my gateway to access the memory instance variable from the perspective of other objects, not from the perspective of the same objects that I'm in, right? So I'm going to return the index here if I found something. If I didn't, then I'm just going to say after the loop finishes, return the current index, which is equal to -1 in this case. Okay, so let's update the main script, which is, we say that it's called stored file. That's my main script here. Okay, how about we try this? Let's try the driver code. Or you know what, let's try it from the accounts.py. Let's see it from the accounts.py perspective, right? So let's continue the accounts.py here, and let's say that let's talk about a little bit about the login one, right? Okay. So let's say the following. Let's just rephrase something. Let's say that, let me write this as a comment there. Okay. Let's say for creating an account, which is this method, right? or someone can say it's sign up or new player, new game, whatever. So this is sign up like that. We would want to search for two things. We would want to make that inside the database or the data file when we are searching, right? We will want to search for the username and we want to search for the email. These should be unique for everyone. So if one of them is inside, if one of them exists in the data file, then no account will be created, right? Or we can say that the account is gonna be invalid, right? Else the account is going to be valid. So we can then embark and create the account. And by create the account, I mean that the database or the data file and the memory that is holding the content of it inside the object of stored files or DB handler is going to be updated, right? All right. So that's when creating an account. What about logging in? So if we are logging in the system, so for login, I would want to search for the username. That's it. That's enough for me, right? So because the user, whenever you log in, you don't enter the mail. You just enter the username and password. So let's say if username exists, then search for password, right? If password exists, then we would say that the user is in the system, exists in the system. Now log him in, log in. Else we would say, for example, if the password right, if the password was false but the username exists, then we would tell him that wrong, for example, wrong password. But if the username did not exist from the get-go, then we would say that not exist and register first. Alright, so this is my scenario here. Why did it look like this? Alright, whatever. Okay, so let's say that this is the login, right? So for the login, I would want to use the search method, which is inside the stored file, which can be found in any stored file object, which in this case, looks what we got. We have a stored file object, which is the DB handler for data.json that has been stored inside accounts, which is a class variable inside the account class. So I can say that via the class variable accounts, right, I'm going to use the search method, right, and I'm going to search for what here? In the login, I'm just concerned about searching for the username, right? So I'm just going to send the username and I'm going to send the actual value that the user has entered as the argument that has been sent to the login method, right? So this is going to return, remember, the stored files definition, the class definition has the search. The search returns either -1 if this loop wasn't successful in finding that current element, that current dictionary, that current record. If it found that actual record, right, then if it found the actual record, if it found the value for the specific key, in this case the username, it's going to return the actual index of that dictionary, the actual index of that record, which in this case we have only one record, right? We have only one record. We have record 0, index 0. That's the only element inside that list, right? So this is going to return an index, right? Whether it's -1 or not -1. So if that means, of course, that the user exists, if the index was not equal to -1, so the user exists, then typically we would want to check on the password, right? So now I want to get the password, but how would I get the password? Remember, if you have the index, you can just say, if you have the list, right? If you have that list, you can just say that list name index between brackets that current index, right? So we can index the list with the actual index that we have found to get the rest of the information, right? But where is the list? Where is the actual content of that JSON? Yes, that's correct. It's inside the memory variable inside that object that is stored inside the accounts class variable, right? So we would want to get all of the memory content, right? So we can either always keep on doing the following. Like we can either go like this. We want to check the password, right? So you can do if account dot accounts, right? So I'm going checking entering that class variable dot memory. Since this is basically this is storing a stored file object, which is a DB handler object that contains the memory, which contains the content of the sent file, right? So I can check the memory. Now you have the list. Now you have the actual list, right? So now you can index that list with the found index that you have found, right? From that part, the index is typically not 0, not -1, right? And once I have the index, now you have the actual dictionary. You have the actual dictionary. For example, you have index of 0, so you have this with you. So if I have the dictionary, now I can check the current password key. So I can check the current password. What did I call it? PS, right? I can check the current password key. Is it equal the password that the user has entered or not? Well, if it is equal, then this is a good chance to get the mail as well. If it is equal, then this is a good chance to get the mail because we're gonna use the set function and we're gonna send to the set function the username and password and email, right? So I'm going to use the same thing again, but here from that index, from that position, from the dictionary, I want to access the key that is mail or the email and store it inside a temporary method variable that is called email. Now, one thing that we are violating what we have said before is that this account object that we are in is using an instance variable of another object, which is basically the accounts object, and that's not typically what we want to happen. We want to maintain some sort of separation here. Like we want to maintain some what we call the single responsibility thing, that if you want to get the access, if you want to access that variable, you should respect that as a stored files class. I offered you a method to get that variable, so do not access it directly. So you can just stick to that convention that we have made and access the memory. This is typically returns the memory to you, so there's no difference here, right? Like that. But every time you're gonna call that function, it's gonna return the memory. So I just not use this once like that, and let's say that you have the current temp list or temp memory. Okay, it has all of the memory inside of it. Now we can use that temp memory there, and we can actually use it there as well. All right, so now we're gonna use the self.set account and send the username that we have taken from the login and the password as well, and the email that we have temporarily saved, and we would want to print to the user something like logged in. You are logged in, right? But what if the password didn't match, but the user matches, the index has been found? So you can tell him that something like wrong password, the password you entered is incorrect. Okay, what if the user wasn't found at all? Like the index was actually something else, that -1, that is not that is basically -1. This is what I'm saying. The password or the index was -1, so we should tell him something like that not registered. You have to register first. Alright, so this is my login method. Alright, so how about we try this? I think that's enough right there, right? Why is it something is wrong. Something is not right. Something is not, yeah, okay, okay. So let's try to create an account of, let's say, account, for example, from the account class, and the account is created. Now let's try to log in, right? So let's say account.login, and let's consider these the inputs that the user is going to enter. So let's enter something like that, and it's going to tell me that I'm not registered, right? And what if I enter something like Ahmed? I know that I have this guy, which is me, and that lame password. Let me enter a wrong password. It's gonna tell you that this is a wrong password, but I'm an existent user. Let us, in the time being, check for the current status of the um, username. Let's say, for example, I want to see my username. Am I logged in or not? Right? So it's gonna see that this is none. Right? So let's print a couple of stuff as well. So this is the email, and this is the password, and finally this is the logged in. All of these will not be set, right? Now, whenever I enter the correct password, it's gonna tell you that there is a small error. What did we do here? Oh, we misspelled that one. All right, let's recreate this. There is another name error. Password is not defined. Where is? Yeah, here. Okay, so that needs to be password. Okay, now you are logged in. Now let's check our values. You're gonna see that all of them has been updated, but there's something wrong with the username. Oh, okay. My bad. All right. Okay. Now, if you want to understand what just happened, just mail me about this. All right, because it's kind of hard to explain. But bottom line, just do not overthink it. Python, whenever Python takes a new variable that isn't inside the instance variables, for some reason, Python developers decided that this variable will be created on the spot. I don't know why. In other languages, if that variable isn't inside that object, it will just tell you it's gonna give you an error telling you that that variable does not exist. But now look at this misspelling that I made. That misspelling previously made an actual variable that is called user name of some sort. So to check that, you can just say dict. You're gonna see that that misspelled variable has been created on the spot on runtime. That's how Python works, guys, right? Anyways, let me just delete this cell, right? So now I can say that the account is partially ready. I have the login existent, but what if I wanted to, what if I wanted to do the following? What if I was already logged in and I tried to log in again, right? Now this should throw an error. Like if you are logged in, for example, in Lucy Chart, you shouldn't be able to log in twice. You wouldn't even have the button to log in again. You would only have the button to log out, right? So we would want to raise this kind of error, right? So let's make this if statement before of this one. All right, so let's say that before doing anything, all right, we want to say, so we would want to say the following. If the current username, if there is a current username, if it's not none, this means that the guy has tried to already log in, and this means that the set account has actually been triggered, and this means that all of these values has taken actual values, right? So this means that this login has happened twice, right? So if this is the case, if this equals the past UN input or parameter, then we can do something like already logged in, right? Or already logged in. Okay. Now, if we try to do that now, let's see this. Okay, that totally didn't work. That totally didn't work. So what's going on here? All right. Yes, again, it's the same annoying mistake. User name. Okay. Okay, so it's telling you that account object has no attribute username. What did we do here? Did we miss this up from the get-go? Username. Username. Alright. Alright, it works now. Now Python can sometimes really get annoying, but anyways. So you are already logged in, right? What if I am already logged in? What if I try to log into someone else? Like, what if I try to log into someone else? I know that we only have this guy in the database. Like, consider that we have another entry. Okay, so let's say that this entry is something like I don't like that name. Let's just call Ali, and let's give something like that. Ali A. Okay, so let us just run all of these one more time. Like that. Now what if I try to log in with Ali after I logged in with Ahmed, right? And give something like this. It's gonna tell you that Ali has to be registered. That's a good indication that our system works, but it should have logged me in. So, oh yeah. Remember when I told you that remember that we have inside testing we have data.json, and inside CRS we have also data.json. The thing is that data.json that is inside testing has not been updated, so I just need to be consistent in this area. Okay. All right. So now let us try to rerun everything again. Now that's a problem, because let me just show you this in slow motion, if you may say. Okay, so now let's run this and let's create an object and let's log in Ahmed. He's logged in. Check the values. He's logged in. Now let's try to log in someone. Let's override that login with Ali. Now check the values. Ali is logged in. Now that's a problem, right? So we want to make sure that this does not happen. So let's say here, if we had a username, if there is a current username, all right? If there is a current username, and that username, right, is not the same as the past username as an input. Okay, so I have Ahmed, and Ahmed is not like the past one, which is Ali. Then we would say something like invalid multiple logins. So let's say you need to log out first to attempt another login. Okay, so let's try this now. Now I'm logged in as Ahmed. Let's try to log in as Ali. It's going to tell you that invalid logins, and this is not going to be updated. Right? Right. So let's look at the create account. Right. So let's say that the actual middleman here that's going to serve the create account is the account valid. Right. So let's say the account valid is going to take the same set of parameters. Or you know what, in the create account, if we want to check if the account is valid or not, we just want to check on the email and username, right? If this email and username does not exist, then that guy has never been there in our database, so let's create for him an account, right? If it exists, the username or the email exists, then there is someone with that specific name, so we can't create an account for him, right? So we are going to use the same search method from before, right? So let's say that the search method is going to return the index just the same way we did it there for the login, right? So let's use that search method. Like that. And let's say that account value is going to take username and email. It's not going to take everything from create account. Note that account value is going to be called internally inside create account. So account valid is going to be called internally here, right? So it's going to take what we care for that should not be in the database is the current email and username that the user is going to send as inputs for the create account method to create an account, right? So if we found an index, right, let's say the following. Let's say the right. If that index was not equal to -1, then we would say that we found that guy, right? So there is a user name with that UN sent in database, right? And that's not a good thing. So now that creation, that account that the user wants to create here via these parameters is basically invalid, right? So he cannot create an account. So you're gonna say that we are gonna return false, as in it's an invalid account, and we're gonna turn some sort of a message here. So we're gonna tell him something like username. That's the kind of error raised. So username exists, right? My username or let's say a user that username already exists. Okay, and let's do the same search for the email, sending the key and value, right? So here, or let's say this comment is kind of not right. So let's say a user with that email in DB exists, right? So it's invalid as well. And so we're gonna say that email exists. A user with that email already exists. Now, what if we didn't find a user with that email, or we didn't find a user with that username or with that email? Like none of these if statement has executed. In that case, this account should be valid, and we would return a statement or a message like account created, for example, right? Note that the actual creation is going to be happening or done via the create account, but we're just sending a message to convey that operation is going to be that operation is taking place, right? So an account has been created, right? So that's account valid. Let's say now that create account is going to be the following, right? Okay, so let us call account valid. Let us call account valid. Now notice something. This is a class method. Just the same exact way as send an instance method is using another instance method, we would want to make this also the case with class method. When a class method, for easier, for readability only, there are ways for class methods to use actually instance methods, but I don't want to make things complicated. So let's say that if this is a class method, I want it to interact with another method. Let's just make it a class method as well, right? Just for simplicity. Nothing is going to be different. Only the self parameter here and there is going to be changed. That's it. CLS, and that's it. right? So if that account valid, right, when we give it the username and we give it an email, right? If it returns, let's say that this is gonna return true or false, true and a message, or false and a message, right? So let's say that this is the flag that's gonna be returned, the boolean inside valid, which is true or false, and a message variable that's going to convey, or that's going to have the message returned on the right hand side here from every return, right? So let's take the base case here. If the account is not valid, right, then we would just print that message, right? But what if the account is valid? So this is true. So this is the case, right? So now we should update the current memory. We should update the current memory that is inside that account's object, which corresponds to the actual data file. So we need to do two things. We need to update the memory inside that object, and we need to update the actual data file. We need to update the actual data file, which is the data.json. Okay, so we need to do both of them. So how can we do that? We will eventually use the write method from that object, which is the stored file object, right? So we will want to use the write method that we have written there. But how can we use the write method? How can we define it? Let's just continue with the actual create account. Let's say if it is valid, so I'm going to create the account. So let's just take these values and let's form a dictionary. How about that? Let's form a dictionary, right? Or let's send them to the write method and let's see what the write method will do, right? So first of all, we are going to print the message, which in this case is going to be account is created. Before of it, we can say that we are going to use the write method from the accounts object, which is the stored file, or the DB handler object, which is a class variable, and we are going to send to accounts the actual values of that user that wants to create his account, which is username, password, and email. Now, what should the write do? How should the write handle this? Now let's say something. Let's say that write is going to take username, password, and email, right? So what should it do? Let's say that it's gonna take that username and create a dictionary inside data.json, a record like that. And remember, again, I'm doing the write method with that technique because I have the data file structured as this way, right? It's gonna create a dictionary with the key of username to align with the rest of the the rest of the values here, username, password, and email, with the same actual syntax, UN. Okay, and with password, and with what do we have here, email, like that. And first of all, it's gonna need to update the actual memory that is stored internally in the stored files object, which is stored inside, in this case, in the account entity class. It's stored inside the accounts class variable. So this guy has an internal memory that we need to update before we update the actual file. So the sent values are going to be used to update the memory, right? So self memory. Remember, memory is a list after all. That memory, or the content here, is a list. So you can just say append like that. And after we append the memory, after the memory is updated with that new guy, so imagine that memory is updated and a new dictionary will pop up with these values that we have just entered, like that, right? Once the memory is updated, we can take the whole memory and rewrite the whole data.json. That's the downside of having JSON files. The downside is that you cannot append, not like the text files that we have seen the last semester. You cannot append a new line like text files. In JSON, I've talked about this in the essentials, by the way, in the essentials video about dictionaries. So please make sure to watch it before watching this, right? In the essential, I say that in the JSON file, you cannot update anything. You cannot append a new thing. You can just overwrite. You can dump the whole thing. That's all you can do, right? So I'm gonna take that updated memory, and I'm going to open up that link to that file. So the file name, remember the file name that we have entered whenever we created the stored files object, which is data.json. That string has been stored inside that stored file instance variable, right? So again, I'm going to open up stored file, and in the purpose for in this case writing, right? And I showed you in the essential that you can use the context manager. I'm going to use the context manager in this case. It's the same thing, right, as a file, like that. And I'm going to use json.dump. Dump that content in that a file. All right, and dump that content into a file. So okay, let's try to think. Let's try to try this. All right, let's update the account. There's something wrong here with the account valid. I know that I have, yeah. Okay, so let's just rerun this to, okay. Let's create an account. Let's try to log in. Login works. That's not a new thing. Let's try it via that account object. Let's try to create an account. And remember, create an account is a class method actually. So you can create an account via the class name. So account.create account. And let's try to create an account that is there. So let's say that I'm going to create Ahmed Halek مثلا. And give it any password. Remember, the account valid in the create account only checks on the username and password. So I'm going to enter a username and a very different mail, right? So I'm going to check the username in this case. Let's see. So it's going to tell you that username exists. A username with that name already exists. So let's try to write something like different username but the same mail. In this case, it was what? In this case, it was what? All right. So a username with that email already exists, so it works. If we have both of them matches, so the first one is going to complain, right? So what if we had both of them utterly different, unique? Let's say something like I can't come up with any name, seriously. Kareem, any password, and let's try to say, so the account is typically created. Let's check this. Let's see. Well, nothing has been updated here. All right, what about the memory? Let's see the memory variable. Account dot, I'm going to access the accounts variable, right? The memory from it. All right, so we have Kareem, but we have a slight problem that the data was not recreated. Oh, I think it's created. Yeah, it's created. I'm talking, yeah, that's the whole issue in this recording, that I have a data.json inside my actual project folder, and I have a data.json with the Jupyter notebook inside the testing folder. So yeah, so we should have this Kareem guy already there inside the database. So we have created a record for Kareem. Okay, so if we try to run this again, it's gonna tell you that the username already exists because we have created this one time, right? Okay, so I think that's the account in a nutshell. So account actually works now. So we can create a py file for it. So let's say account.py, right? And I'm going to take everything and put it there. And we need to update as well the stored file. Like that driver code is just unnecessary because we have now defined the right method. So let's say that right now where is the right method? Before we update the right method, if you watch this essentials video, you'll see that I use a small trick, right? So let's say that this trick is basically like the following, right? Maybe we can send keyword arguments, and if you don't understand this, please watch the essentials video. And instead of doing that, and instead of sending these guys, I'm going to send them as actual keyword arguments. Like this. But note, in this case, this needs to be the same actual value, the same actual key that you have inside your data.json. It needs to be the same value if you're using this method. All right, and I am going to edit that right, so it actually unpack these guys, right? So it's gonna unpack these into an actual dictionary, right? So this is the actual dictionary that I'm going to take as unpacked, and it should give you the same exact result. Let's rerun this. Let's try to create an account, but let's name him something like Lui. Okay, so the account is created. Now check the data.json, Control S, you're gonna see Lui created like that, right? So it's the same thing. One last thing I'm going to do is to differentiate the responsibilities, because we have something that updates the memory, and we have something that updates the actual data file. So I'm just going to add a method that is called update. This is where the actual memory gets updated. So this is going to update the actual memory variable. So this is going to update the actual memory variable. So this is going to be there. So this is going to update the memory. And this should write the actual content of the memory inside that file. That's it. And now inside create account, first of all, I'm going to send these guys into the account dot update, and then I'm going to write that value. So let's try this with someone that is called, for example, Germana, and the account is supposedly created. Control S, yeah, we have this user here, right? So I'm just going to take everything and dump it into account.py. Yeah, that's what we did. Now in stored files has been slightly modified as well. So we added the write and the update methods. Note that you don't need to use Jupyter Notebook. I'm just using this because that's how I see things get a little bit simpler when we are dealing with these kind of interconnected modules, right? Now we want to you can try some driver code to check that, right? So you can do the same thing, account equal account, and now let's say first of all you're gonna import, because Python is gonna complain, it's gonna tell you where is that. In Jupyter Notebook that import is seamless, because in Jupyter Notebook all of these are happening in the same script. But in a Python file you need to import, and this is the part where, like, typically that's the only high coupling area. Where is it? That's the only part of your class diagram that should be highly coupled, because you are importing and creating stuff inside account. So basically, if that class that is being imported and created an object from is not there, if it's not existent, maybe the account will crash, and possibly the whole system will crash, right? So from account import, I'm sorry, from stored files, right? And make sure that they are in the same directory. From stored files, import stored files, right? All right. And now let's create an account and let's try to, for example, try login and give it. We said we have Germana in our system now. Oh yeah, we are working on the data file here, not that one. So we don't have typically Germana, but however, we can just try and check that. So let's say 1, 2, 3, nothing. There is no errors. That's a good sign. But let's see what happened. It's going to tell you that this is not registered, right? Now let's try to. I think we don't really need the print. Yeah, it's not registered. So let's try this guy is going to tell you that the password is wrong, and now the password, you are logged in. And if I try to log in again, it's going to tell you are already logged in. Now let's try to log in with someone different. First of all, let's just create an account. Create account, and let's say that I'm creating Omar, right, and providing that that mail. So created account, let's check the data.json that is inside my directory here, Control S. Now we have Omar. Now let's try to log in, and that's the interesting part. Let's try to log in as Omar and give it 1, 2, 3. Okay, it's gonna tell you that user exists. First of all, yeah, we cannot create it anymore. That's totally right. But let's try to log in. So we have Ahmed. Now invalid login. You need to log out first. Now let's try to log out and first, and then log in with Omar. So log in. Let's check a couple of, or just one attribute before the login and after the other login. So Ahmed and then Omar. All right. So let's just remove that driver code for now.